everyone. This is Tom Ballard, the Groundwater Guy, and today we are talking about naturally occurring fluoride in groundwater, i.e., geogenic fluoride. So that's naturally occurring. I know there's a little bit of a controversy considering fluoride that's added to water at the water treatment plants, but this is something a little bit different. We're talking about fluoride that occurs naturally in groundwater, and we're going to talk about the geologic conditions, treatment, and those types of things because it is regulated by EPA as a contaminant. So that's going to be the topic today, and so we're not really getting into the adding fluoride controversy. We're talking about naturally occurring fluoride or geogenic fluoride. So let me get our slides going here. And all right, so get that out of the way. And we are talking about naturally occurring fluoride, understanding, managing, and treating geogenic fluoride. So geogenic is naturally occurring, basically, is what we're talking about here. So our objectives today is we're going to look at the natural geologic settings where high fluoride is likely to occur. We're going to understand the geochemical factors that control fluoride mobilization in groundwater, recognize how groundwater flow patterns affect fluoride distribution, applying source water management strategies to avoid high fluoride, and there's a number of options there. Design well construction to exclude high fluoride zones if we know where those are, how to identify those, and how to build the wells to deal with that. And select and operate appropriate treatment technologies at treatment plants, implement effective monitoring programs, and then respond appropriately to fluoride violations. So we're going to kind of look at the whole scheme of our source water, how the fluoride gets in there, and then how we deal with it when it comes to the treatment plant. So, so the challenge really is we have 220 million or more people worldwide affected by high fluoride in groundwater. So there's over 60 countries with documented fluoride problems. So it's fairly widespread. And another number to remember is the EPA MCL is 4 milligrams per liter. So you want to remember that. Fluoride has no taste, no color, no odor. So the only way to detect it is by laboratory testing. You can understand the geologic conditions, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, where fluoride is likely to occur, and then you want to test it to see if you do indeed have fluoride. So the safe range here, less than 5 milligrams per liter. Just comparing it, and I know we're not talking about adding the fluoride to the water after treatment, but generally this is kind of the range we're looking at. So under 5.5 milligrams per liter, insufficient dental protection. Generally, when they add it to water, it's going to be the zero point 0.7 to 1 milligram per liter for which is considered optimal for dental health. But above 1.5 now and up to 4 and over, you look at the possibility of fluorosis. So that's actually the fluoride impacting your bones and creating issues for you there. So there's really a narrow safe range, which is one of the reasons why it's controversial to add it back into water. Yeah, within that range, it supposedly helps your teeth. There are probably better ways to do that, but this is generally what we're looking at. So you start to get high at the MCL and above, and you start to run into some severe health issues. And that's why it's important to know how fluoride occurs in groundwater and how to deal with it. So, so the geologic sources of fluoride, we can really look at the minerals and we can look at the rock types here. So primary fluoride minerals, fluorite, which is calcium fluoride, is about 49% fluoride. So this is the primary source of fluoride in groundwater. But you also look at cryolite, that's actually around 54%. Fluorapatite, 3.5 to 4%, so a little bit lower. Micas like biotite, 0.5 to 2%. amphiboles like hornblende, that's going to be 0.2 to 1%. And even volcanic glass is going to be highly variable because of the composition. So, where do these minerals occur? The rock types, granites and rhyolites, so pink and gray crystalline rocks, more likely to contain fluorite. Volcanic terrains, especially silica-rich lavas, alkaline igneous rocks, so cyanide. So getting into the more alkaline rocks, uh, geothermal areas like hot springs and volcanic activity will precipitate out fluorite minerals. Sediments from granitic weathering and phosphate-rich sedimentary rocks. So, and we'll see some of these in these black shales and things that we'll see, and also I'm probably most familiar with it showing up in some of these dry lake bed areas in the Mojave Desert area of California. So, um, so even small amounts of fluoride-bearing minerals can produce high groundwater concentrations if the geochemical conditions are right. So we're going to look at that here. So, so where does high fluoride occur in the United States? Pacific Northwest volcanic terrains, New England granitic bedrock in New Hampshire and Maine, southwestern U.S. That was what I was talking about down in California to the dry lake beds in the Mojave Desert area of California. Certain Great Plains aquifers and geothermal areas like Yellowstone region. Worldwide, you're looking at India, 17 of 28 states affected. And India has some real challenges. India is also very high on arsenic, too. So they kind of go together with that volcanic terrain that they have in India. So high fluoride, high arsenic in India. So they have some real challenges with their groundwater over there. China, 29 provinces that have identified fluorosis issues. The East Africa Rift Valley, endemic fluorosis there, and this is due to active geothermal within the Rift Valley. Mexico, central and northern regions, Argentina, central regions, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Groundwater, there's different groundwater dependent areas that are impacted in West Africa, Ghana, Senegal, Ivory Coast, North Africa, Algeria, Morocco, and Libya. So you can see that fluoride is fairly common throughout the world, and accordingly, the health issues are recognized, and that's why this needs to be dealt with. So. Fluoride problems are most common in arid, semi-arid regions with specific geological settings, such as volcanic or granitic terrains, like we talked about in the previous slide. All right, so geochemical controls. Fluoride concentration depends more on water chemistry than the mineral abundance. So that's very important. So understanding the geochemical controls on fluoride mobilizing into groundwater, very important. So factor number one, pH is the most important. So pH less than 6.5, fluoride stays bound or precipitates, so it's not going to mobilize into water. A pH of 6.5 to 7.5, you're going to see moderate fluoride mobility. You get above 7.5 into the 9 range, and you're going to see high fluoride solubility. So the reason is alkaline conditions release fluoride from minerals and increase the fluoride solubility. So that's why the pH is so important. Factor number two, calcium content. High calcium, so greater than 100 milligrams per liter, forms insoluble fluoride, so the fluoride stays low. Low calcium, there's no precipitation control, so below 50 milligrams per liter, and you're going to see fluoride increases with low calcium. So high pH, low calcium is going to be a relatively ideal environment for fluoride to mobilize. So clay minerals replace calcium with sodium, removing natural fluoride control. So you'll see in clay beds and stuff, you might have more fluoride being mobilized. So, so the high fluoride water signature, pH 7.5 to 9. Water type, sodium bicarbonate, dominates. That's going to be ideal for fluoride mobilization. Calcium less than 50, sodium greater than 50, and hardness is less than 100 milligrams per liter. So these are all conditions that are going to be ideal for the mobilization of fluoride in groundwater. Additional geochemical controls, residence time is one. So, uh, days to months, generally you're going to have low fluoride because there's just not much time for it to mobilize into the groundwater, even if the pH and calcium conditions are appropriate. But if it's there, if it's deep groundwater, if it's there for a long time, now you got the opportunity for a lot of fluoride. So generally you're going to see fluoride problems deeper. So longer contact with rock means more fluoride dissolved is generally the rule. So climate conditions, arid, semi-arid, we already mentioned that. But evapotranspiration tends to concentrate fluoride. Limited recharge, it increases the residence time. Alkaline soils promotes high pH water, which we talked about mobilizes fluoride. So generally, the worst problems in dry climates, especially those that are subject to a lot of droughts, uh, temperature, geothermal areas, hot water dissolves more fluoride. So deeper aquifers equals higher temperatures with depth. So that's going to mobilize more fluoride. So Yellowstone area has fluoride up to 50 plus milligrams per liter. So pretty high fluoride there. So, and these factors often combine. The worst fluoride problems occur in deep aquifers and arid regions with geothermal activities and long residence times. So that's the perfect witching point there for high fluoride. All right, so groundwater flow patterns. We talk about Tothian flow systems. Groundwater follows complex 3D flow paths, not just horizontal flow like we picture. So understanding this is really critical to predicting fluoride distribution in aquifers. So shallow local flow, generally short residence time like we talked about, and recent recharge influence, you're generally going to see low fluoride. Intermediate flow, that's going to be moderate depths, transitional chemistry. You might start to see fluoride, creeping up there to the MCL. Deeper regional flow, if you have an area that has fluoride that can be mobilized, longer residence time, complete ion exchange, you might to see exceedances above the US EPA MCL of 4 milligrams per liter. So you can also have pumping induced problems. And we'll look at a case study a little bit later about St. Louis, Potosi, Mexico. But basically, in a nutshell, in the 1970s, their fluoride was less than 1 milligram per liter. Increased pumping over 20 years. And by the 1990s, they had exceeded 4 milligrams per liter fluoride, basically due to the pumping causing mobilization of that deeper water that was richer in fluoride. So it does, pumping patterns can affect these things too, because you can start tapping into and mixing some of these waters from shallower zones and deeper zones, and then basically contaminating things with fluoride through the pumping process. All right, so depth stratification. This is something we want to look at too, is because the deeper is generally, as we saw, is going to really affect our fluoride concentrations. So let's look at that here. Um, so say 0 to 50 feet, generally lower fluoride, less than 1 milligrams per liter. You're going to have higher calcium, lower pH because you're getting recent recharge influence. Um, 50 to 200 feet, say, and this is going to vary. These are just general rules. You're going to get into that transitional chemistry, so you might be in the 1 to 4 range. And once again, this is areas that are going to have natural fluoride occurring. So these are the conditions you're going to see. If there's no geologic conditions that have fluoride in them, then obviously this does not relate to that. But you're looking at, you got fluoride there that has the ability to mobilize. This is what we're seeing. And then below 200 feet, greater than 4 milligrams per liter, you got the sodium bicarbonate chemistry, the high pH, old water. complete ion exchange and more susceptible to fluoride mobilizing in there. Um, so it's important if you're drilling in areas that have known fluoride concentrations that you sample during drilling. Sample every 50 feet after entering bedrock. Um, that way you're going to identify your high fluoride zones, and maybe if the geology changes, you might even want to tighten that up a little bit. So it's going to really depend on the geologist that's logging your hole. Um, and we want to end up with a strategic well completion so we understand where the fluoride is, preventing costly mistakes, and getting those samples there instead of coming back later and having to modify our well after it's already in the ground. So this is important, really looking at it and doing your homework ahead of time. If you know you're in a high fluoride area, then you're going to want to do the sampling ahead of time and profile that well, so you can design the well accordingly. Source water management strategies. Prevention is always cheaper than the treatment. So, strategy number one, surface water, generally less than zero point 0.5 milligrams per liter fluoride, sand and gravel, less than one, shallow dug wells if geology permits, and interconnection with neighboring low fluoride utilities. So, those are alternative sources we want to look at. Um, Instead of trying to develop and treat the water, if you got an alternative, then start looking at that first. It's going to be cheaper in the long run. Number two, well location. This is going to be important too, is doing the geology, the hydrogeology ahead of time, understanding what your geology is. So looking at the geology, avoiding granitic and volcanic areas that might have higher fluoride concentrations, shallower depths. Target the upper zones, as we saw. If you have higher recharge rates, you're going to have lower fluoride. Um, Test nearby wells, or get data from nearby wells so you can understand what the pattern of fluoride is in the area so you can design accordingly, and do test drilling and run those test holes and do some testing before you do the final well design. And then strategy number three is strategic well construction. If you got to drill in this area, then we do our profiling of the well. We identify the low fluoride zones and the high fluoride zones. We case off those high fluoride zones, and then we only screen the low fluoride zones. And you design your well accordingly to minimize the amount of fluoride that's coming into that well. So these are our three strategies for source water, before it gets to the treatment plant. All right. Well, construction example. This is just a made up one, but it gives you an idea of the scenario. So the scenario here is a 200-foot bedrock well with depth sampling results. So we say 0 to 80 feet. We saw zero point 0.9 fluoride. 80 to 150 feet, 4.5, and 150 to 200, 8.2. So that follows that normal pattern of deeper fluoride. And now we see that our yields in those areas. So we're looking at in those two zones that have relatively high fluoride, we're seeing twice at 30 gallons per minute as opposed to the 15 gallons per minute of the shallower zone. So you may have to give that up in order to have low fluoride water here. So you're going to screen that upper zone in 80 feet in this case, and then seal off those lower zones. You're losing that water, but you're not going to have to treat it. So the completion method, you'd seal those lower zones, you'd seal them off, and then you'd get a 15 gallon per minute well here in this. Uh, so without depth sampling, you might screen the entire 200 feet. The blended fluoride here would be right around 4 milligrams per liter, so exceeding the EPA MCL, and so you're going to be looking at 150,000 minimum for a treatment system. So the depth sampling, the well profiling versus just assuming you're going to have a treatment system, huge difference in cost there. All right, blending multiple sources. This is another way to do it. This is a time honored technique, and we see this a lot with arsenic in certain areas where you'll see, wells with low contamination and wells with higher contamination. You're able to do some blending, and obviously you have to get regulatory approval to take this approach, and they're going to want you to monitor a little bit more when you do the blending. But here's our blending equation, and so what we're going to do is we're going to take our two sources here. So maybe you have well A that has 200 gallons per minute at 0.5 milligrams per liter fluoride, so relatively low fluoride. Well B producing about 100 gallons per minute, but it's exceeding the MCL for fluoride at 5. So our blending formula here, we're going to go through the calculation. We're going to come up with a blended amount of 2 milligrams per liter fluoride when we blend it like that. And that's really going to put us well under the MCL. And so the blending is a viable option here. So the nice thing about blending, it's low capital costs, no chemicals or residues, simple operation. You got to do the calculations, and then you have to make sure that you're doing these right amounts, and you may need to tweak your well output discharge to make sure you're blending at the right amounts. And you can adjust the blend ratio. So obviously here you got a little latitude, so you can fluctuate a little bit. So, but the trick is you have to have multiple sources available. You have to have a common distribution system. You have to have flow measurement on each one, regular monitoring. Both sources must be reliable, and you need to have this difference. You got to have a low source, and you got to have a source that may be a little higher, and that you can run your calculations here and actually achieve an acceptable result that's below the MCL using blending. But it is easy to do, and it is a perfectly legitimate technique for treating fluoride. All right, treatment technologies overview. When source management isn't sufficient, we got to start looking at treatment. So we got a number of treatment here. Probably the two here, reverse osmosis and activated alumina, are what we're going to look at for most small water systems. Bone char, contact precipitation, and distillation are really going to be for residential point of use and really small systems. So probably not going to really consider those. So really for a smaller water system, RO or AA are going to be your best bets. RO is going to get you about 85 to 90%. Um, Activated alumina is going to get you 90-95% removal. So you're looking at you're going to look at for RO 150K plus ongoing costs of backflushing and that type of thing. For activated alumina, there's going to be some replacement of media, but you're going to be more in the 50 to 150K range. And these are general numbers. Depending on your flow rates and all that stuff, these are going to vary, obviously. So your operating costs, your complexity with activated alumina is relatively high because you have to have pH control. We'll look at that in a little more detail. Um, RO is actually a little easier, even though it's more expensive. It can handle multiple contaminants. So there's some advantage to going with RO, even though the costs are going to be higher, and your ongoing costs for that back flushing and dealing with that, the brines, is going to be, there's going to be an ongoing cost with that. So RO treatment, basically, most of you probably know, but water's forced through a semi-permeable membrane at relatively high pressure, so 150 to 250 psi. Fluoride and other dissolved solids are rejected and concentrated in a waste stream. That is your brine that must be disposed of. So the advantages, high removal rates, 85 to 95%. You can remove multiple contaminants simultaneously. It's a proven technology. It's reliable. It works across a wide pH range. Relatively low maintenance. Automated operations are possible. The disadvantage, relatively high cost, 150 to 750K. So it produces 25 to 50% reject water. So that's your brine that you need to get rid of. And some people have ponds, they dry it out and then they haul the sludge off. I mean, there's a number of ways to deal with that, but there are additional costs that go into that. So it's energy intensive. There's potential for membrane fouling, so you gotta watch that, and it will produce acidic water. So you may need to do pH adjustment, not as much as with the AA solution, but you need to kind of watch that. So the key operating parameters are feed pressure. That needs to be monitored continuously because that has to stay within the 150 to 250 psi. The recovery rate 50 to 75%, and you're going to monitor that daily. Um, your product water, you're going to want to have that under 1 milligram per liter. You're going to monitor that weekly. Membrane cleaning as needed, but when the pressure drops 15%, that's usually the sign you need to clean the membranes and back flush. And then membrane replacement every 3 to 5 years as the performance degrades. So that's going to be something you're going to want to monitor, and that's going to get plugged into your asset management plan because you're going to need to have the capital costs available to replace the membranes. All right, activated alumina treatment. So the water flows through a bed of porous aluminum oxide granules. Fluoride ions are absorbed to the alumina surface through ion exchange. So it's basically an ion exchange using activated alumina is what it comes down to. So a little different than the ion exchange resins, but because you're using the activated aluminum, but the principle is the same. It's ion exchange. The critical requirement here is the pH must be between 5.5 and 6.5 for effective fluoride removal. Above pH 7, the removal efficiency drops dramatically, and that usually requires some acid addition, sulfuric acid or CO2, and pH control. So pH monitoring is a very important part of using activated alumina. So um, water quality effects, pH above 7, poor removal, optimal is 5.5 to 6.5. High sulfate reduces capacity. If you got high silica, you're going to have problems. And high alkalinity requires more acid, so that's where your pH control comes in. So uh, the media management capacity, 2,000 to 4,000 bed volumes. Breakthrough monitor weekly near the end of the run. So, monitor for fluoride and see if you're getting breakthrough. Um, and then the options single use, dispose and replace, or regenerable, clean and reuse. Obviously, the regenerable is going to be a little bit more expensive. So, the replacement is going to be about 8 to 12K per replacement. And once again, that's going to vary. Your mileage may vary, I guess. So, community systems where pH adjustment is economical and skilled operators are available is really where this might come into play. Not recommended for systems with limited resources or water has a natural pH of greater than 8. So it's going to be very difficult to maintain that pH control if your natural pH is above 8. You're going to be beating your head against the wall. So you're better off going with an RO system in that case. All right. Treatment selection. So here's some questions you want to ask yourself. What is your treatment? What is your system size? Obviously, individual homes are going to use point of use RO. Small communities, you're going to consider all these options. Larger communities, the small connections, or the small systems I'm talking, RO or the AA is going to be the best option. So raw water chemistry, you got to consider that. So pH less than 7, the activated aluminum may work well. pH greater than 8, you're probably going to have to go with RO. The AA, you're just not going to be able to, you're going to spend a lot of time adjusting the pH and it's probably not going to be worth it. So if you have multiple contaminants, RO is generally the way you're going to have to go. And what are your resources? If you have skilled operators available, then activated alumina is possible. If you have limited operator skill, then RO may be more appropriate. And a limited budget, bone char for small systems. I'm not, we put that on here and I am saying it's probably not the best bet. You probably want to look at RO or AA for small water systems. So, um, and just a reminder here: always consider your non-treatment options first, because treatment is there's not only capital costs available required, but there's ongoing maintenance costs as well that you need to work into your asset management and your capital improvement plan. So, monitoring requirements. Generally, for community systems greater than 25 connections, you're going to be looking at required of annually, really recommended quarterly, and you're going to monitor the entry points. Uh, Systems where you're near the MCL 2 or greater on the fluoride concentration, uh, required frequency quarterly. You're probably going to want to monitor it monthly. So, and then once again, the entry points. If you're using treatment, monthly monitoring, but probably weekly is going to be better. And you're going to want to monitor both the influent and effluent, and post treatment weekly, and that's going to be in your distribution system. So, parameters you want to monitor: fluoride, pH, temperature, alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, TDS. In treated water, you're going to want to monitor the fluoride, pH, and disinfectant residual. And if you're using activated aluminum, you're going to want to monitor aluminum concentrations because you might get some potential leaching there. So, operational monitoring daily. You're going to look at system pressure, flow rates, pH, operational hours, weekly, your effluent fluoride, pre-filter pressure, chemical usage, and monthly your performance trends and your maintenance needs. So you're going to want to look at that on that schedule and keep to that. So and you're going to want to do the record keeping requirement. So I really like looking at the trends on things because trends are really important. We're I talk a lot about data-driven decision making, and that's relevant to any treatment plant operation because you want to look at the trends, see when you might be expecting breakthrough, and you're able to actually do predictive analysis if you're really looking at the trends. So digitizing your records and looking at the trends, very important for this stuff. All right. Health effects and public communication. We talked a little bit about this. This is relating back to, the dental effects. So, under 5, you're not really, it's not going to affect anything. When they add it back, the zero 0.7 to 1 is what they consider the optimal range for dental health. And then, when you get into the MCL violation is over 4, now you're talking about skeletal fluorosis, and treatment is really required, and that can do some significant damage to you. Vulnerable populations are obviously infants consuming formula mixed with tap water, elderly individuals with cumulative exposure, children under 8 during with tooth development, and people with renal disease or compromised kidney function can be impacted by fluoride. So, public communications guidelines. You want to explain to your customers that fluoride is naturally occurring, not a contaminant or pollution, and you're dealing with it appropriately. Uh, Provide the specific levels in your water system with context and describe potential health impacts and the utility's action plan. And be transparent about your options and timelines for addressing high levels while you're doing what you're doing. Communication is always important. Don't keep things secret and explain to the public. And generally, they're going to understand. They may have some questions and want to know what you're doing, but if you're on top of things, yeah, and you communicate that to your users, they're going to understand. All right. So, potential emergency response for an MCL violation. Um, if you get fluoride levels exceeding the MCL within 24 hours, you want to confirm the sample result with a second test and notify your state drinking water authority. And if possible, take the source out of service if possible. Not always possible, but if possible, you do that. Within 30 days, you're going to issue a public notification to all customers, provide alternate water sources for vulnerable populations we talked about, and post notices at community locations. And ongoing actions, you want to implement your solution plan, whether it's treatment, blending, a new source. You're going to want to get on that. You're going to want to monitor the fluoride levels weekly and provide regular updates to the public, your stakeholders, and document all actions taken. So, um, and obviously, um, fluoride issues are different than having a coliform issue. So you never want to do a boil water order to address fluoride problems. Boiling concentrates of fluoride makes the situation worse. So you're having the exact opposite effect you would. Now, if you had coliform or E. coli issues, yeah, that's appropriate. But boil water for fluoride, not appropriate. So that's important to understand. So here's a case study. This is actually in New Hampshire, bedrock wells. So granitic bedrock in southeastern New Hampshire with naturally occurring fluoride. Approximately 5% of bedrock wells exceed 2 milligrams per liter fluoride with concentrations typically increasing with depth. So kind of a typical fluoride situation. So shallow dug wells here, um, in the 15 to 30-foot range. Um, uh, obviously zero point 0.5 milligrams per liter, so you're within the safe range. But um, shallow dug wells have their own problems. They tend to be more susceptible to coliform issues and low yields. Medium depth bedrock in the 100 to 250 foot range, they were seeing zero point 0.2 to 2 milligrams per liter. So, you're seeing some that were generally exceeding things, but you're getting close there. And the deeper bedrock wells, greater than 300 feet, were greater than 2 milligrams per liter. And so you're seeing possible MCL violations because you're getting high fluoride at those depths. So the effective solutions in this area are shallow well construction when yield is adequate. So that's striking the balance between yield and depth. Um, they were using point of use RO systems. That's about $1,000 to $1,500 per home, and point of use is considered at the home itself. So where you're using it. So not a treatment plant, but an RO system at the individual residence. So municipal water connection was where available. They were putting people on municipal water and alternative well locations based on neighbor surveys. So really looking and seeing where the fluoride was occurring and drilling wells appropriately. And depth selective well completion with sealed casing to understand and profiling the wells, sealing off those zones that had high fluoride and getting generally low fluoride water. So the key lessons here: test water quality before well completion, and I recommend drilling a test hole. And if you know you got contamination issues with fluoride, drill a test hole and do that depth profiling there before you actually complete the well. So um, check other wells in the area. That's a no-brainer. You want to look and see what the distribution of fluoride is. Um, Traditional dug wells often avoid fluoride problems, but you got other problems there. So I tend to avoid dug wells. You want to educate the homeowners about um, the geology water connection, and that's what they did here, and document all test results to build regional knowledge. So you can share that information when you go out and drill a new well. Now you know where the fluoride occurs, where it doesn't, what depths people are getting it at, and you can intelligently design a well and locate a well to minimize the amount of fluoride you get in the well. So, all right. So here's another case study: San Luis Potosi, Mexico. Historical fluoride trends over a 30-year period, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. Fluoride levels in municipal wells increased dramatically due to pumping induced changes. So pumping actually dramatically impacted the amount of fluoride. So you're taking a deeper zone, and because of the pumping, you're mixing that with shallower water that was low fluoride, and now you're contaminating that whole aquifer. So we can see in the 70s you were less than 1 milligram per liter. Um, in the 1980s, you were 1 to 3, and then in the 90s you were above 4, and that was all due to increased pumping. You can see during the 70s limited groundwater use. In the 80s they increased their pumping, and then they went to pretty intensive pumping in the 90s, and now you're starting to see problems with the fluoride. So the excessive pumping drew deeper, higher fluoride water upward. Vertical flow from the lower aquifer with had 8 to 12 milligrams fluoride. So now you're mixing that with shallower water that really didn't have much fluoride in it, and you're creating one big zone of high fluoride water. So that's the impact that pumping can have. So and the decline in water levels now you're all that intensive pumping, you're over pumping the aquifer, and so now you're mainly just tapping the deeper water, so it actually concentrates the fluoride. And regional cone of depression altered the natural flow. So um, the implemented solutions, they managed the aquifer recharge projects in the area. So they did more intensive recharge to recharge that water and get some fresh water in there and basically dilute out the fluoride. Uh, Selective well completion, like we talked about, doing the vertical profiling and completed the wells appropriately. Surface water development where it didn't have fluoride. Strategic blending, and blending is always an option, like we mentioned, and reduce pumping in affected zones. You just got to scale back on that pumping because they're clearly exceeding the safe yield of the aquifer, lowering the groundwater levels, and that's not good in any case because now you're depleting the aquifer. So the key lessons here: pumping can activate fluoride from deeper zones, so that's something to keep in mind. Over pumping can cause a lot of problems, and this is just one example of that. So. Well construction must account for the vertical chemistry, and that's modifying your well, designing the well, and modifying it appropriately. Um, Early warning monitoring is essential. Regional approach is needed, not just individual wells, because where you have high fluoride in an area, it's because it's a natural geologic phenomenon, it's going to vary. So you can have some pretty low fluoride zones, and you need to understand where those are. So sharing and pooling that knowledge can really help you develop wells in areas that are going to have low fluoride. So, sustainable yield must consider quality, not just quantity, and that is important too. And that's something we haven't done a lot in the United States or Mexico is really consider the groundwater quality and as we overpump our aquifers. So, um, source management in the long run is more cost effective than treatment. We know that. So action plan. So what you want to do is a phase one assessment. Test all wells for a small water district. Test all wells for fluoride if you're in an area that has fluoride issues. Review geological data and maps. Determine compliance status. Complete full chemistry analysis and identify your high risk areas. If you're developing more sources, you need to understand where those are. So, develop options, evaluate alternative sources, calculate blending possibilities, gather treatment vendor quotes, consider well construction options, and calculate costs and identify funding. So, this is really moving into the development phase and into the implementation. So, we want to determine our best solution and secure the permits, secure our funding sources, design system, complete bidding, train operators on new processes, and implement monitoring and reporting. So even if we don't have if fluoride exceedances in our new well, we want to monitor that because if we're in an area that has high fluoride, we want to make sure that we monitor that, and so we're prepared to take action if our fluoride levels start going up. So our top 10 takeaways. Geology predicts fluoride, so it's important to understand the geology. Granites, volcanic rocks, geothermal areas indicate high risk. Test before pumping. Do the vertical profiling in the wells. Chemistry is key. Sodium bicarbonate, water type, high pH, and low calcium signal an environment that's conducive to high fluoride. Deeper equals higher fluoride. Fluoride typically increases with depth. Now, once again, this is in areas that have naturally occurring fluoride. So there's going to be plenty of areas that this does not apply to that, so you're not always going to get higher fluoride because you have to have fluoride there to mobilize to start. So pumping can activate fluoride as we saw in the one case study there. Oops, sorry. So prevention beats treatment. always that's going to be more cost effective. Treatment works, but it costs. RO and AA are effective, but they require expertise and investment and ongoing maintenance. So blending is a good solution and it's a legitimate solution. So if you got a blending option, that's definitely the way to go. And communicate with your stakeholders and plan for 20 plus year solution. So do long term planning, not just next year or, or a year down the road. That's we want to look at the long term solutions here. All right, so resources and support. There's a number of different references out there. You can look these up online. I'm not going to belabor these too much, but the I will point out there's a nice book out there, and if you're interested in fluoride from the Groundwater Project, you can look them up online. It's free groundwater books online, and they're constantly adding to their collection. And they do have a book on fluoride, so that's something you might want to look at. And here's some other sources for you as well. Obviously, there's help and technical assistance, the State Water Association, and your regulatory agencies, AWWA, National Groundwater Association, can help. And then the funding sources, the revolving state revolving fund, USDA Rural Development, EPA, Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, state infrastructure banks, a lot of different ways you can get funding to deal with this. So if you do run into a problem where you need to do treatment and you need to look at funding sources, this will get you started there. So all right. These are just some questions I thought I'd throw out there for you to think about, your local setting. And I'm not going to dive into these in too much detail here. You can look at them, but, you know, think about the geology of your area, your local setting. So, have you had any fluoride detections? Have you tested for fluoride? Are you in a geologic environment that might have fluoride and then you probably need to look at testing that. And if you have, then what kind of trends are you seeing? Are you seeing any depth stratification? Have levels changed with pumping rates? If you're assuming you're collecting historical data, um, what alternative sources are available in your area? Have you considered, are there options for tie-ins with other water systems, some interconnects? Have you considered selective well completion for your new wells, blending a viable option, treatment technologies fitting your situation, and how would source management versus treatment compare in costs? And then your funding. You got to look at your funding sources. What can we afford? How does our capital improvement plan tie into this? Do we have the funds available? Are we going to have to go get a loan or a grant to do this? And so, um, and so then you're going to start to need to put together the numbers in order to secure that funding. Available materials. There, we we got a number of things here that there's a, you can go through here. What we do for a lot of the different contaminants, we'll put in a field guide for quick reference. So if we have a client, for instance, that has a fluoride problem or an arsenic problem, we put together a field guide for them, and that really gives everybody a chance to go out and follow that field guide for testing and determining if you have a problem, and it just kind of guides people, especially newer people coming on. These days there's people aging out, there's new people coming in, so just having some of that knowledge base available is important. So, and really understanding if you have fluoride or any type of contaminant issue, you want to understand the geology of the area, whether it's naturally occurring, whether it's man-made contaminants, and where those contaminants are, and identify those. So it's really important to understand what's going on in your source water areas and build that into your plan and make sure that you appropriately test and plan around that. So with the right planning and approach, water utilities of any size can effectively address naturally occurring fluoride issues and protect public health for years to come. And that applies to any contaminant once again too. So, and prevention is always more cost effective than treatment. So that's thinking about it a little bit upfront. So that's really what we want to look at here. So, all right. So that is That's our, hold on a minute here. That is our slides. All right. So that is our show on naturally occurring or geogenic fluoride. If you have any questions, please feel to drop them in the comments. Like and share this video if you will. If you have any questions about this or any of the other things we have in our videos, my email address is right here. So you can feel free to reach out and get a hold of me. We do have some training that's going to be available through our Water Masters program, where we're looking at management of small water utilities and really focusing on the management end of things rather than the operator training. And because we see a real gap there, but really managing these types of things falls within both the management and the operator purview. So important to know this stuff. All right. Thank you very much. I'm the groundwater guy. We'll see you next time.